This video is brought to you by OKCoin Crypto Exchange, where you can buy, sell, and trade your favorite cryptocurrencies, and you don't have to pay high fees. OKCoin has very low fees, lower than many of the other crypto exchanges in the market. You can also stake your cryptocurrencies and keep 100% of the rewards. There are no fees. Other exchanges charge fees. OKCoin allows you to keep 100% of the rewards. Sign up with OKCoin, link in the description.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto channel. With me today is Perianne Boring, who's the founder and president of the Chamber of Digital Commerce. Perianne, great to be speaking with you today.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with your background. Where are you from? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a small town called Lakeland, Florida. It's in Central Florida. I moved to DC my senior year of college, and have been dedicated. I've dedicated my career to the crypto space from early days, but my roots come from Florida.
Awesome. What did you do before you founded the Chamber of Digital Commerce?
So I did a stint on Capitol Hill. I worked for a member of the Financial Services Committee, and I worked on finance, economics, and tax-related policy issues on the Hill. And then I left the Hill and I went into media. I did a short stint in media. I worked for RT America, and I hosted a financial services publication, or a financial services television show. And then I also was a contributor to Forbes. And then I left all that to start the Chamber.
And what was your first encounter with crypto? Did someone tell you about it? Did you read about it on a forum?
Yeah, so I went to DC. I very much have a libertarian leaning perspective and political ideology. Growing up in Central Florida, I was studying economics at the University of Florida during the 2008 financial crisis, which was essentially the housing crisis, which was basically the state of Florida. So there was just, I think that was just an impressionable moment for me. And kind of what I learned through that is there were a lot of things between our monetary and our financial system that I did not believe truly reflected the values of what I was taught in school and of my community and of my family. And I wanted to really fight for something better for my generation and the generations that will come after me. And I worked on a number of legislative initiatives, including the Jobs Act, which brought us crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending, or the rules around that. And I was just a huge supporter of that movement. And so one of my colleagues said, hey, if you're into crowdfunding, I really think you would be interested in this thing called Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And that was in 2011, maybe 2012. So it was pretty early. And they were right. From the moment that I kind of discovered this virtual currency that was not controlled or created by a government or a corporation, just that concept as a liberty-leaning economist was incredibly fascinating. And I eventually just came to the conclusion that this was going to be the most important thing I would see in my lifetime and have got to be a part of this movement. So it was a very kind of organic progression as to how I got into this space, but it really has to do with my ideology, and it really resonates with me at my core.
So is that your ideology, is that what led to you forming the Chamber of Digital Commerce? Did you see a need and you were able to bring a solution to the table?
Yeah, so I mean, I learned about Bitcoin early days, and I told you I left the Hill and worked in media. So I had a financial services show on RT, and I was one of the first international journalists to cover Bitcoin. And I had the opportunity to follow Bitcoin throughout all of 2013, which was really a huge year for Bitcoin. That was the year that Cyprus went through its bailouts, and Cypriots started buying Bitcoin just as kind of a hedge against having an uncertain economic time. And that was when Bitcoin really had its first kind of international news coverage. And to me, that was interesting because it really started to show that there was a use case for cryptocurrency as an alternative digital asset or an alternative currency. And then we had Silk Road and Mt. Gox and these very large kind of like negative issues that were covered very broadly across the mainstream media in a very negative way. And then kind of what came out of that is you started seeing the DC reaction to that, which was pushback and a lot of skepticism and criticism from our public policymakers. And to me, it just became very obvious that this industry, this community was going to need and should have dedicated professional policy advocates in our nation's capital, working with our public policymakers to help guide them in all of the issues and concerns that they will and may have regarding this technology. So the whole kind of concept and idea of the chamber also came together very organically. And that was, we launched just over 7 years ago, and we were right. There is a huge need to have experts working with our policymakers, and we've been incredibly busy ever since. And we think that trend is only going to increase over the next couple of years.
Well, I would say you're doing God's work, trying to educate the politicians.
Thank
you. So the mission, if you can tell us about the core values and the mission of the Chamber of Digital Commerce, certainly to bring education to the politicians and regulators in DC. Anything else that you're working on that you can share?
So our mission is to promote the acceptance and use of digital assets and blockchain-based technologies. And really our key, or maybe our first priority, is to be a resource to our public policymakers. As someone who worked on the other side as a congressional staffer, I can tell you that the people who work in government, the people whose jobs are to form policy, they heavily rely on the private sector to support them. And it's really important, in my opinion, that we are at the table and we are helping the policymakers form public policy. So that is the first, most important role of the chamber, to be a resource, to help provide data, information, academic level resources, studies, analysis, all the things that really go into getting the laws and the regulations right. And if we don't get it right, there's a lot that's at stake. There's a very fine balance between protecting and guarding against concerns that our policymakers have, from consumer protections and investor protections and illicit finance and everything else. These are noble things to want to protect against. But if you don't do it right, the cost is stifling development and innovation. And we believe that this technology is going to be a game changer. It's going to play a huge role in our digital economy for many generations to come. And it's essential that we get this right. So getting that, finding that balance is a very iterative process. And it's something that takes a lot of thought and consideration and care and time and resources. And we're here to make sure that that's done correctly.
Absolutely. Can you give us a bit of the state of the union on U.S. crypto regulations? Given that you're on the front lines, we're seeing bipartisan support, but yet you have this situation with the infrastructure bill. There seems to be some lag in getting comprehensive regulations in place. If you could take us behind the curtain, what are you seeing and hearing?
The state of crypto, the state of crypto union, it's incredibly complex. So cryptocurrencies, blockchain technology, they really cover, pretty much every area of law. And so we have a very prolific public policy platform at the chamber, and we have built our expertise going on a decade now. This isn't something you can just spin up in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. It takes years to really be able to do the types of work that we do. Where we are today in DC, so maybe just kind of focusing on US federal policy. So of course we have a new administration, the Biden administration. So we've gone from a Republican to a Democrat administration. So the transition is, pretty much complete at this point. And now that we have a number of key new people in place, you're starting to see that Biden agenda beginning. It's just starting to roll out. And then in addition, we have a new congressional session in both the House and the Senate. Is also, you have Democrats in the majority. So we have a Democrat-run Congress and administration. And that has a huge impact on the way crypto policy is being debated in Washington. So maybe just kind of going through the different areas of policy and law that are being debated today. You mentioned the infrastructure bill, or the BIF. In that bill is a provision on information reporting for digital assets. So we're talking about tax policy. What I think is kind of interesting about the way they approach, there's a lot of things that are very interesting, but the general kind of conversation about why they're doing this is because they want to close the tax gap. When you hear somebody say that, what does that mean, close the tax gap? What they're saying is that we are not a community that's paying our taxes. We are not in compliance. And we have been very vocal that perspective is disingenuous and it's not honest. We are a community of law-abiding citizens. The people in crypto, we want to do the right thing. The companies at the Chamber of Digital Commerce that we represent, they have even sent a number of formal requests to the IRS asking to clarify what their requirements are on information reporting specifically. So the reason why I'm kind of highlighting this is you have to kind of get into the mind of how this is being debated. And I think the very premise is just incorrect. And that's why we've been so vocal on this issue. So when it comes to the infrastructure bill, the whole idea was, well, this industry is not in compliance and we've got to close the tax gap. Well, that's just not correct. We do need clarity, but it's not because we're not a law-abiding group. It's because the IRS has not provided that guidance that the industry has been asking for many years. And there's other areas beyond information reporting where we need clarity. There's other issues like staking and lending of tax policy that need to be clarified. So that's kind of one stance. We're also seeing a huge amount of interest in stablecoins. And again, the premise there is that, well, stablecoins may be systemic. They may introduce systemic risk into the financial system. Again, I question the premise because stablecoins do not reach what most people would consider the level of systemic. Could it eventually grow there over time? Yes, but are stablecoins systemic today? No. Kind of the third area where we see a big focus is on AML, anti-money laundering, and ransomware really being the key issue, where we have really just this idea that cryptocurrencies are perpetuating ransomware. Again, the premise is incorrect. While, yes, lots of ransomware payments today are being paid in cryptocurrency, ransomware has been something that has been around before cryptocurrencies even existed. And even if all cryptocurrencies were banned today, you would not fix the ransomware issue. The only way to fix ransomware is through information security. Having better cybersecurity protocols. Remember the Colonial Pipeline, the account that was hacked did not have two-factor authentication turned on when that employee was required to do that. And if they had, we may have been in a very different situation. So when we kind of talk about like the state of crypto, of the state of the crypto policy union, it's very much a fear-based perspective. And you look at, there's been a number of letters that Senator Elizabeth Warren has sent to both Chairman Gary Gensler and Secretary Janet Yellen. And again, when you read the types of concerns from Senator Warren and other policymakers, it's very fear-based. So we have some work to do to rewire people's thoughts of, yes, there are concerns, and these are legitimate concerns, and we need to mitigate against those risks. But what's really missing today in the conversation are the benefits of this technology. And because this technology is just going on 12 years old, it's very nascent, and a lot of it hasn't had the opportunity to grow and flourish and to make its way into impacting just average people's daily lives and the way that they do business and interact and transact using digital platforms. But if we overregulate today, we may never see those benefits. And we have to think about the opportunity costs when we're regulating as well.
Tell us about the strategies and tactics that you at the Digital Chamber of Commerce are using to help make this right. Obviously, we talked about a lot of the hurdles that we have to get through. What are the steps that you guys are taking?
Yeah, so again, we really strive to be that resource to our public policy makers. And our biggest tool is education. There's a quote from a briefing we did a couple of years ago, and we had a former official from the Department of Justice come, and we were doing an AML briefing, and this quote has just always stuck with me. And he said, "I've met a lot of people who know a lot about Bitcoin, and I've also met a lot of people who are Bitcoin skeptics, but I've never met somebody that knows a lot about Bitcoin and is a skeptic." So I continue to believe that education is one of the most important tools that we have, because once somebody really understands the power of this technology, how it is enabling a more inclusive and diverse financial system, how we're reaching the unbanked in ways that really has never been possible before, how we're able to enhance consumer protections with blockchain technology by giving individuals more power and ownership over their data and their information in a way that we've really never seen possible before. Once people understand how it works and can see how this can really impact people's lives, it's hard to not want to be a champion and a supporter. But the problem with that is it really does take a person to go down their own individual study to get to that place. And again, as someone who has worked on Capitol Hill for many years, both as a staffer and then kind of off the Hill in an advocacy perspective, it's rare that you would have hours with somebody to be able to really walk them down that path. When you have the opportunity to meet with a member of Congress, usually, you get 15 or 20 minutes. You can't kind of go over all of this in that kind of a time frame. So you have to inspire somebody to want to go home and learn about this stuff on their own. And that's really what we are in the business of at the Chamber. And that takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of time. It takes building a lot of trust. It takes building relationships, which is why I'm very adamant that you can't do this type of work as like a side project or a hobby. It's something that, our team at the Chamber, this is their career. This is what they spend 100% of their time doing and thinking. We are here to be that resource. And it's really hard to do it in any other way.
Do you feel that there needs to be more lobbying from crypto companies, given that, look, other industries lobby significantly more, a lot more funding behind it? The crypto community or companies need to come together and do more lobbying, and this would maybe help in educating and getting information out about crypto.
Yeah, and I kind of hesitate to use the word lobby because I very much define the work that we do at the Chamber as advocacy work. When you think of lobbying, you kind of think of kind of an individual company pushing for something that individual company needs or wants or is trying to get through an approval process. At the Chamber, we represent over 200 companies across the ecosystem, and our positions always reflect what is best for the industry as a whole, not what may be best for one company or one type of company. So we have significantly increased our resources on our policy and our advocacy team over the past 2 years, and we're continuing to grow those and expand those. But that education piece really is one of the most important things and strongest tools that we have. So for organizations or companies who are in the crypto space, who are thinking, what can we do to advance this type of work? Because it's very clear, I think today, now more than ever, that we have to be engaged in public policy in order to have a successful future for the crypto space. What companies can do is get connected to your representatives in Congress, in the House, and the Senate. One of the most kind of, I think, impactful cases we can make is this economic development case, how you're building jobs and infrastructure and promoting the local economy wherever your business is located. Wherever you guys are, and lots of businesses have multiple locations. And if that's the case, then you have even more offices that you can reach out to. Make sure your member of Congress, your member of the Senate know who you are. Make sure they know the name of your business, what your business does, your size, the types of employees that you have. Just start teaching them about what you are doing as a constituent in their districts. And then when we have an issue, if there's, I don't know, maybe the Senate's deciding to create a new law that could potentially really impact many companies in this space, and we need their help to fix something. We're not starting from, hi, this is who we are, this is what we do. You've already established that relationship. They've already had the opportunity to get to learn about your company, and they're ready to support you. Another thing that we're doing more of is site visits. So we are planning some site visits for the fall, where we are going into the headquarters of member companies. We're bringing local members of Congress with us so they can learn about the operations of these businesses. So again, this is really about education, helping our elected officials understand what the business of blockchain technology companies really look like and how they're contributing to their local communities and economies, and building those relationships. And that's a really important thing that I think all businesses should be doing, but it's really critical in the crypto space, given we're in such a key moment for public policy.
That's great advice and absolutely makes sense. Can you tell us about some of the politicians, members of Congress that are working with you? I know some crypto-friendly ones. I've interviewed Tom Emmer, the Darren Sotos. Any of those folks working with you?
Yeah, so we have on the House side, we have the Congressional Blockchain Caucus, and that's really our most kind of active group of supporters. And the majority of the crypto forward efforts are being organized by the Congressional Blockchain Caucus. You mentioned two of the co-chairs, Darren Soto and Tom Emmer, and there's four co-chairs. So Representative Swikert and Representative Foster are the two others. And there's about 24 members in total. It's bipartisan. So there's both Democrats and Republicans on that caucus, really from across the country. On the Senate side, earlier this year, Senator Cynthia Lummis and Senator Sinema announced the Innovation Caucus, and that I think is really going to develop in kind of like the companion piece to the Blockchain Caucus on the House side. So between those two groups, those are really where we have the most friendly members. But we are seeing crypto really rise in its level of importance. We're seeing the people in the highest forms of leadership, both on the House and in the administration, starting to weigh in. So it's kind of rising beyond that, and there's other offices and other members that are engaged and that we work with at the chamber.
That's a good sign that there's more activity, more people getting involved. I want to ask about, and this might be a difficult question to ask, but maybe from your perspective, there's a lot of different bills that have been introduced from like the likes of Warren Davidson, Tom Emmer, Securities Clarity Act, Token Taxonomy Act. Any one of those bills that you feel is ideal, not that there's a competition, but rather what would help bring clarity to the entire market?
Okay, so this is another really a key issue that you've touched on, and the issue that is trying to be solved here is clarifying the jurisdiction of digital assets. So it's really what's turning into this age-old question of when is a token a security and when it's not. And it's truly to my demise that we're still talking about this, because this is something we've been debating since 2016 at the Chamber. In fact, we started a whole working group called the Token Alliance, just dedicated to addressing this issue. So it's it's really amazing that in the fall of 2021, we're still working on this. So despite Chairman Gensler's comments at the Aspen conference a couple of weeks ago, we do not believe we have clarity from the SEC on which tokens are considered a security and which ones are not. And we know this from a number of different factors. One, there's a number of companies that are going into litigation and who have been in litigation with the SEC, and the chamber is engaged in that process, serving as a friend to the court. We do not believe clarity and regulation should be made through enforcement. We just don't believe that's a productive way to form policy, but that is where we are. In addition to that, Congress is now stepping in. So because the SEC has not issued the clarity many in the industry have been asking for, the other kind of way to address this would be for Congress to pass a new law, providing that clarity to the industry. Again, as a former congressional staffer, I can tell you that it's really difficult for legislation to pass into law. Only about 2% of legislation introduced actually becomes law. Wow. And it's a very significant effort to get something through that legislative process. And this is something we educate our members about and remind them about all the time, because it is it's very easy to go and spend a lot of resources on Capitol Hill and never actually accomplishing anything. So we're very particular about how we expand resources in this way in order to protect the resources of the industry. But as you mentioned, there's about a half a dozen legislative proposals that all look a little bit different on how to address this issue. There's two pieces of legislation that we are supportive of at the chamber in particular. One is the Securities Clarity Act. This was introduced by Congressman Tom Emmer. And that bill really, to me, it looks like a silver bullet because it provides a pretty defined definition to provide that clarity on when is a token a security and when is it not. The challenge I see with that piece of legislation, while we do support it, is that getting it through the legislative process, what that process would look like for that bill, it's not clear today. And again, we want to be careful at trying to push something that may not have the opportunity to move through the legislative process. The other is HR 1602. We call it the Joint Working Group bill, but I'll just pull up the formal name. It's the Eliminate Barriers to Innovation Act. That's HR 1602. This bill, it's not a silver bullet, but it sets up the path to establish that clarity. And it would establish a joint working group between the SEC and the CFTC. And it tasks that working group with providing that clarity. So this would take a little bit longer to eventually get the clarity that we need, but this bill has a much higher propensity to move through the legislative process. In fact, it's already passed the House of Representatives. It was passed under a suspension bill. And what that means is that they'll package up bills that are considered non-controversial and non-partisan and pass them through suspension, which kind of sets them up to be passed in a similar way through the Senate. That bill has not been introduced in the Senate, but it's gotten halfway through the process. So HR 1602 and the Securities Clarity Act are two legislative efforts that we are supportive of. But again, it's having to rely on Congress to get that through it is a significant ask. So we are still continuing to push the SEC to issue regulation on this, and again, also serving as a friend of the court on litigation related to this topic as well.
So for the folks who are listening, many who are crypto holders, part of the crypto industry, what advice would you give them that they can do? Is it calling up their respective congressmen? What else could they do to help push things forward?
So we have a pretty amazing ally at the SEC and Commissioner Hester Peirce, and she has put forward a safe harbor for digital tokens. And she published this year the 2.0. So she issued it last year, got a number of comments from the community. She's made some updates to it, and she's republished it. The problem is that the SEC has not put that forward for rulemaking. So that is an effort we would encourage people and companies to look at and consider. And if the safe harbor is something that you would support, be vocal about that. Because ultimately we need the SEC to put that forward for rulemaking. And if they start hearing from the industry that the industry would like this put forward, that may be able to help move it forward through the rulemaking process at the SEC. So there is a solution, or a partial solution at the SEC in Commissioner Peirce's safe harbor, and supporting her and getting that put forward is something that would would be significant progress on this issue.
Now, there's a very big lawsuit the SEC has against Ripple, getting a lot of attention, a lot of eyeballs on it over XRP. What are your thoughts on that lawsuit? And obviously, we touched on the lack of clarity and the SEC's position. And what steps are you doing to help in or participate in that?
Yeah, and this really comes down to that issue again. If the SEC had done its job and provided the guidance that so many in the industry had asked for, perhaps less companies would be in the position of having to address this through enforcement and through litigation. And again, rulemaking through enforcement is not a productive way to make public policy. It drains significant resources, both from the private sector and the public sector. And it's just not the way we should do public policy making, but this is where we are. The Ripple case, that the SEC versus Ripple case, one of the things that I find frustrating is that Ripple had been in operation for many, many, many years, and had been in open conversations with the SEC for a large part of that. So why now? Why on the last day of Chairman Clayton's tenure was this suit filed? And if there were issues, why would we wait for an organization to get to this size to put forward the suit? But more importantly is the outcome of this case, and how is that going to impact other organizations, other token issuers, other companies? Is this going to set a precedent that could impact the further development and innovation of other cryptocurrencies and blockchain technologies? So the chamber is preparing an amicus brief in this case. We will be serving as a friend of the court. We will not be submitting this on behalf of the SEC or on behalf of Ripple. It'll purely be a neutral party, and we'll be building on the case law that we developed in the Telegram case. So we also filed an amicus brief in the SEC in the Telegram case. Again, we didn't take a side saying we support SEC or Telegram. We're here to provide information for the court, so they're not conflating the investment contract and the token. We do think those are two very separate things that should be treated separately. So we'll be building on what we developed for Telegram and the Ripple case, and our goal is to ensure that legal precedents are not set that conflate those terms, and that we're also ensuring that this does not stifle the further development of this ecosystem in the United States.
I want to switch gears just because we're short on time, but what do you think about Bitcoin's growth and the crypto market's growth. And it seems like we're still continuing that bull run. Do you have a Bitcoin price prediction and anything you can share there?
I don't have my own price prediction. There's a number of models that investors are using to value Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And really the question people should be asking themselves is not what is the price of Bitcoin or what is the price of XYZ cryptocurrency, but how do you value it? And once you're able to value it, then you can determine, does this make sense as something I want to invest in, or determining when to buy and sell. So the models that are most commonly used in the investor community is Metcalfe's law and stock to flow. And stock to flow, famously really has the Bitcoin price point at infinity. But if you put Bitcoin on an S curve, so we measure adoption of technology using S curves. And what that says is that the amount of time it takes from a technology to go to 0 to 10% adoption is the same amount of time it takes to go from 10% to from 10% to 90% adoption. So according to multiple surveys across the industry, we're estimated to be at about 20% of adoption today. So we estimate that 20% of American households own some form of cryptocurrency today. So stock to flow has 90% adoption around the year 2029. And they predict that once you have 90% of households who own Bitcoin, the price will be $10 million of Bitcoin, which is pretty astronomical, but you have to kind of complete the S curve to get there. So it's a very simple kind of economic 101. If you have fixed supply and demand increases, only one thing happens in that scenario: the price increases. So I think that model is very easy to follow. And we've been on that trajectory since the inception. So there's no indicator that we wouldn't follow that going forward.
And to your point of adoption, we see next month, El Salvador is about to make Bitcoin a legal tender. We see corporates are adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet, Tesla, MicroStrategy. What are your thoughts on that? And do you see that trend continuing?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're seeing significant interest from retail, corporate, and institutional investors. So just to kind of address the demand piece. So we believe that really the biggest barrier to further corporate adoption of putting cryptocurrencies on the balance sheet has to do with accounting of all things. And so for all of our CFAs and our accountants, they'll know this issue well. Or for any public company that's potentially looking to put crypto on the balance sheet, one of the first things that you understand is that it's treated as an intangible, which really is quite punitive to the balance sheet. So we at the Chamber are engaged with FASB, and we're looking to get that changed. And we're also looking to get GAAP standards for digital assets. But once the accounting issue is fixed, that will alleviate a huge amount of the concerns for corporates to put it on their balance sheet. In the meantime, you're seeing your most forward-leaning CEOs embracing it, but we do believe we will see additional corporate adoption of Bitcoin. To address institutional adoption, so Fidelity Digital Assets released a study just last month that said, actually, I don't have it memorized, so I'm going to look it up real quick. But institutional adoption of Bitcoin was, doing a quick Google search, Fidelity Institutional Adoption Survey. It's worth the wait because it really was an amazing, 71% of institutional investors plan to invest in cryptocurrency. So that's according to the Fidelity Digital Assets Survey. So I think we'll continue to see significant institutional investment and corporate investment in cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. And again, when demand goes up and supply is fixed, only one thing is going to happen in that scenario: the price is going to increase. But then the other thing you touched on of sovereign nations adopting Bitcoin as legal tender, I think that is a pretty amazing development to see that type of recognition at, at the highest levels of government. Albeit, El Salvador is a very small country with probably not a lot to lose in this race. But we are hearing that there's many other Latin American and South American countries that are very interested in following suit. And I think we will see other countries follow suit. And then kind of taking that just one step further, I think the next logical step is, when will we start seeing central banks putting Bitcoin, replacing, adding Bitcoin as a reserve asset? And the reason why I think that is highly likely is because Bitcoin is replacing gold. Even the chairman of the Fed, Jerome Powell, has testified in Congress stating that we are seeing Bitcoin replace gold's role in a portfolio as a diversified asset, and central banks around the world hold gold. So would the next logical step for them be to start adding Bitcoin? I think that's highly likely.
I want to touch on NFTs. We're seeing likes of Visa buying NFTs. What are your thoughts? Do you personally own any NFTs?
So I do, and the Chamber, on our 5th anniversary, which was 2 years ago, we issued an NFT to commemorate our 5th anniversary. And there's a couple things about NFTs that I think are absolutely amazing. And just to give credit where credit is due, part of this was shaped by the team at CMT Digital. They did some research on this, and they shared it with me just the other week. But they looked at how NFTs are helping level the playing field for minorities in the artist community. And the majority of art sold through traditional auction houses, it's like in the 90% of white artists. We're a very, very small amount of art that reaches kind of those highest levels of your auction houses is art that was created by minorities, and specifically African Americans. That is not true in NFTs. With NFTs, it doesn't matter where you came from or what you look like or what your heritage is, because it's all put on the blockchain. And there's no kind of arbiter to kind of choose, whose art is more valuable than the others. And we're seeing exponential growth of art created by African Americans and other minorities issued through NFTs. So this is a huge tool for economic development and empowerment for those who really hadn't had the opportunity in the artist community before. So I think leveling that playing field is something that's so promising and something that we should protect. And again, that's an area where you don't want regulations to inadvertently stifle those types of benefits, because this is something that really could be a game changer for many artists all around the world. And then above and beyond that, what I think is interesting is what's really most interesting about the business of NFTs is like who's really making all the money, and it's the exchanges. So I actually just looked at the numbers over the weekend, but it's really incredible what OpenSea has done. OpenSea charges 2.5% transaction fee on all of their NFT transactions. And they're doing, they're on track to do 1.2 billion in revenue over the next year. That's real money, and that's a real industry. And if you juxtapose what OpenSea charges with your traditional auction houses, like your Christie's and your Sotheby's, yep, their commissions can be as high as 25%. Mm-hmm. So there is a really incredible business that's developing. And again, OpenSea, it's a decentralized platform. So they're able to eliminate a lot of those middlemen. They bring the fee down significantly, but it's still a huge business. So the NFT industry is still nascent and it's still evolving, but there's incredible promises there, not just on how we're empowering different communities, but also there's a new economic model. So the business behind NFTs is quite interesting as well.
I want to touch on, before we wrap it up, women in crypto, and we've seen the numbers increase, but what advice or thoughts do you have about that, and how we can be more inclusive and have more women participate in the industry, whether it be investing or working at the companies, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's obviously ever present in my life. And I've been in the crypto space for going on eight years now. And when I first started the chamber, the only study we had said we had about 9% women. So over 90% men to 9% women. So it was kind of lonely at the very beginning. And it's great now that there's really huge communities of women who are pioneering and entrepreneurs in this space. But really I think my biggest advice for women who want to work in the crypto space is just to not let kind of anything get in the way of your confidence. It can be a critical community, and know that when you have an idea and you believe in that idea, true leaders don't let anything stop them from realizing that and making that happen. And there's a lot of examples of women-owned projects throughout the crypto space that are have been wildly successful. So keep pushing forward and know that there is a large community of women in blockchain and women in crypto. There's a number of WhatsApp groups you can join and get to know people throughout this space. So don't let people, or don't let critical kind of eyes get in the way of accomplishing your dreams. And get plugged into the community. And for women who want help doing that, I'm more than happy to connect people to different groups. So you have your own community, and you can be successful in this space.
So I want to wrap it up here with some quick rapid fire questions, such as, what's your favorite food?
So I am vegan. So I'm just always starving. I'm always constantly looking for food, but just vegan food, plants, vegan burgers. The Impossible Burger is great. And the best vegan restaurants are in New York. So I'm looking forward to getting back to New York soon.
Awesome. Favorite musician or band?
Oh man. I don't know how to pick one favorite, but I love Radiohead. And I also love Glass Animals. I'm trying to get to a Glass Animal concert later this month. But those are two of my favorite groups.
I love Radiohead as well. Favorite movie?
Oh, favorite movie. There's so many to pick from. Let's see. So maybe instead of favorite movie, what I'm currently watching on Netflix.
Sure.
Grace and Frankie. I'm a huge Jane Fonda fan. Thinking of like women in business, Jane Fonda is like in her 70s and she has her own show on Netflix, and she's just so gorgeous and amazing. So if I can have like just an ounce of the amazingness of Jane Fonda, I think, or if we can all kind of share that across the women in crypto space, we'll all be successful. So watching Grace and Frankie, and truly amazed by what Jane Fonda has done with her life.
Awesome. And finally, when you're not at the Chamber of Digital Commerce, what are you doing for fun as a hobby?
I'm working on that. I've been a bit of a workaholic, and so bringing like balance and doing things beyond working is something I'm trying to bring more balance to. But I got a bike, and I've been going on bike rides. I live right next to a golf course, so I take the bike through the golf course, and there's a lot of wildlife out there, deers and birds and things like that. So I love being outside, and on the bike is fun too.
Awesome. Perianne, thank you for being such a great leader in the crypto industry, and thank you for all the work you're doing, and thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Tony.